G'day guys and gal. With the Horus Heresy spanning hundreds of hours of reading across over 60 novels, there is a lot going on. To make matters worse, a lot of it is centered around godlike beings with incomprehensible minds, plans upon plans, moves, counter-moves, confusion and mayhem. To put it simply, understanding someone's perspective of the heresy is very fucking hard, but so am I. As someone who has read every single novel, audio drama and short story of the heresy, I'm about as educated as someone can get, so I feel uniquely qualified to talk about the heresy from Horus's perspective. Why did he turn? What was going through his mind? What was he aware of? What surprised him? What were his actual plans? How much of his will was his own, and how much was the Chaos Gods using him as a meat puppet? What was the last thing that went through his head before his father killed him? These questions and more shall be answered in today's video. Before we get started, we were literally like 50 subs away from 700k, then YouTube did that dead YouTube account purge thing that it does here and there, and it wiped like 500 off. Biggest fucking tease. As I've stated, when we hit 700k subs, I'll be doing a drunk charity live stream, and it'll be the most uncensored, honest live stream I've ever done. I'll also be dropping the last ever Majorkill merch drop, which I've been cooking for months now, and you guys are gonna fucking love. I'll be going turbo with it, and I'll also be giving away some insane stuff during that live stream, like some pre-painted biggies for free. Basically, if you're watching and not subscribed, now is the time. Once we hit 700k, I'll never ask again. Also, for those that want some more Majorkill after dark, more personal content, I do have my Instagram where I post about my various hobbies: piano playing, binge drinking, gooning, gym and Warhammer. It's a good time. To sweeten the deal, I'll also be giving away a pre-painted biggie valued at $1,000 and no longer available on the market to someone who is following my Instagram and who comments on the latest post. The spicier comments, the better. Maybe you can say like Iron Within, or maybe you say Epstein didn't kill himself. Maybe just say nice cock. Doesn't matter, just be following me and comment on my latest post, which I'll link below. You'll get double entries if you tag a friend as well, and I'll use a third-party software to pick the winner. So subscribe and follow. I feel like I've given some pretty fucking good incentives. Today we'll go over the Horus Heresy from Horus's perspective, from when he first decided to be a bold jihadist until he went kaput. Let's get into it. So I need to make a few things clear. No one, and I mean absolutely no one, is omniscient in Warhammer. It's not like Marvel or DC where they have like 7 tiers of gods, ranging from galactic to universal to outer multiversal or whatever the fuck goes on in those comics. The Chaos Gods are not aware of everything that is going on, nor are they all powerful. Same goes for the Emperor. Yes, some people can see the future, and yes, fate and destiny are elements of 40k, however it's been shown time and time again that fate and destiny can be changed and altered by someone with the will to do it. So what I'm saying is that Horus's plan wasn't based on him knowing everything that was going to happen. Some things went very sideways. There were many things he was not aware of, and he kind of gave himself retardation during the heresy on purpose. No, that's not a joke, but we will get to that. Okay, so making it clear there was no, this was my plan all along bullshit happening, let's begin. So a big complaint people have with the heresy is how easily Horus fell. One minute he was father's most loyal son, the next minute he was a fucking terrorist. And yeah, it was rushed, but I'm not here to pass judgment, although I probably will because I can't help myself. I'm just here to see the world through the eyes of a big bold bitch with daddy issues. Up until the moment Horus was stabbed with the Chaos Knife on Davin, he was loyal as fuck. Sure, he had his ego issues that he hid well, but many of the loyalists were flawed in their own ways. See, the knife wasn't just something that put Horus in a coma and then he got convinced to join Chaos. It was a deadly athame that was literally infused with raw chaos power. These knives were known to make people fall to chaos. Cor Pharaon stabbed Guilliman with a weaker version of the one Horus was wounded with, and he fully expected it to corrupt Guilliman. So Horus was in for a tough one. Now Horus didn't just slip into a coma and wake up a traitor. He would continuously wake up and then pass out again. His ship was using its entire stores of blood transfusions just to keep him alive, and he was lucid for a lot of it, talking very openly and honestly about his insecurities, his regrets, his petty feelings towards his brothers, and so on. Horus thought he was going to die, so he let his mask slip. It was only when all signs pointed to his imminent death and he stopped waking up that he was taken to the Temple of the Serpent Lodge, which, if you couldn't tell from the name, is a chaos temple. Again, this temple wasn't just about letting Erebus enter Horus's coma, it was connecting Horus directly to chaos. During the subsequent coma, Erebus disguised himself as Sejanus, Horus's favorite son who had tragically died in a recent campaign. He guided Horus through numerous visions of the future, visions that were accurate but were out of context. For example, he showed Horus a vision of a shrine world with statues of loyalist Primarchs, but no statues of him. Now this would actually happen in the future, but Erebus said it was because the Emperor ascended and made humanity his bitch, destroying those Primarchs who stayed true to the Imperial imperial truth like Horus, when in reality it was the Horus Heresy that ended up with this all happening. Meanwhile, Magnus also entered the coma to try counter Erebus, stripping him of his disguise and revealing his lie, whilst also trying to kill him with psychic power, as Magnus wanted Horus to stay loyal. However, he was unable to kill Erebus due to the wards he had from the ritual, as well as how far away Magnus was. Now, people get confused by this next part. Horus would then rage at Magnus for using warp sorcery because the Emperor outlawed it, doesn't get mad at Erebus for using warp sorcery, then embraces chaos, which is literally warp sorcery. Is this bad writing? Yes. However, it's a bit more than that. See, we find out that Horus just needed a bit of a nudge to turn on his father, rather than a full-on shove or being forced to. Horus believed the Emperor was using him as a tool and would discard him later, handing over the galaxy to Legions 1 to the unworthy mortal humans. He also believed the Emperor's grand design was to become the god of this galaxy. Chaos then positioned itself as a tool, a weapon for Horus to use, not as his master. Horus had a monstrous ego even before his fall, so all these factors together meant that upon awakening, he decided that he would usurp his father and take over the mantle of Master of Mankind. Now, upon awakening, Horus was notably different, but he was still Horus. It's like he had his inhibitors removed and was holding the dark parts of his personality at bay, allowing the ruthless Horus to take charge unchained, but it still was very much still Horus, not some meat suit of chaos. He first needed to get as many Primarchs on his side as possible, the goal being to basically gain as much power as possible, as subtly as possible. He would also keep chaos at bay, only using it as a very subtle tool, as he did not want to give his other brothers the ick as he tried to recruit them. He classified various Primarchs into different categories: will join him, may join him, won't join him. Rogel, Sanguinius, Guilliman, Corvus, the Lion, Russ, and Vulcan would never join him. Likewise, he thought Magnus wouldn't either. The rest he believed he could get on side. Out of the Primarchs he knew would be impossible to turn, he sent the Lion to the other side of the galaxy, he ordered Guilliman to muster on Calth with the intent to ambush him, he pushed Lehman to attack rather than arrest Magnus to try take out two birds with one stone, expecting both legions to kill each other completely. He sent Sanguinius to Cygnus Prime in order to ambush him as well. Likewise, some of the maybe Primarchs, such as Jagadai, he trapped with warp storms to keep them in place until he could approach them on his own terms and convince them to join him, or easily destroy them if they refused. The goal was basically riz everyone he could, then isolate or kill off those he couldn't, meaning he could just beeline to terror with only a handful of loyalists out in the galaxy that would not be enough to save the Emperor. If the plan worked, it honestly would have been a very quick and easy win for Horus, but as we know, the plan did not work well at all. Horus started with the easy wins and conversations. After all, if he went for a risky one first, like Jagadai, and then if Jagadai said no and told the Emperor, the gig would be up. He knew Fulgrim was being cooked by the Slaneshi sword, so he spoke with him directly and convinced him. Fun fact, Fulgrim almost killed Horus and ended the heresy at the beginning, but the sword overcame him and stopped him. He also knew Angron and Kurz would join him happily, if for nothing else than to wreak mayhem. For Perturabo, he needed to be cautious, seizing the opportunity just after the raising of Olympia, when Perturabo was most vulnerable, telling Perty he would be forgiven for Olympia and they would appreciate him like the Emperor never did. Lorgar was already a Chaos boy, so that was easy. Alpharis unexpectedly pledged to Horus with no convincing required, something that made Horus suspicious, but he accepted the pledge regardless. Mortarion was surprisingly easy to convince. Morty held intense resentment towards the Emperor and saw the Emperor as a tyrant, as a new version of his old father. Horus was able to exploit that easily, with Mortarion becoming one of Horus's most steadfast allies. Remember, during these periods, Horus wasn't just jizzing out shadow magic. The effects of chaos on the legions was very subtle and slow, especially at the start. Horus now had enough numbers to begin. He initiated his plan, putting each piece in place exactly where he wanted them to be, even securing the loyalty of Mars by giving them STCs and promising them they could do whatever fucked up forbidden tech voodoo they wanted to that the Emperor had originally outlawed, which resulted in the traitor legions getting extra ammo and weapon stocks, whilst the loyalists were getting less, and the traitors also getting access to a new armor-piercing bolt shell designed specifically to kill Space Marines, something the loyalists did not have. Horus was a smart cookie. The next phase was to purge the loyalists from the traitor legions. After all, many of the Marines, even within Horus's own legion, were more loyal to the Emperor than they were to their Primarch, especially the Terran-born who had fought under the Emperor directly. Through very intense and subtle investigations, about 1/3 of each traitor legion was designated as too loyal and were marked for death. Some legions carried this out subtly over time, such as the Wordbearers. Others barely had any loyalists left to begin with, such as the Night Lords. However, for the World Eaters, Emperor's Children, Sons of Horus, and Death Guard, their loyalists loyalist elements were sent to Istvaan III in a mock compliance, during which they were then virus bombed. However, due to the bravery of Soltavitz and the honor of Nathaniel Garro, this did not go to plan. The first domino of Horus's demise had fallen as the loyalists on the world were warned of the attack and most of them managed to get to cover. Likewise, Nathaniel Garro managed to take control of his ship, the Eisenstein, and escape the Istvaan system in order to warn the Imperium. Things were further complicated when Angron and his legion landed, without being ordered to, on the world to engage the loyalists in battle, something Horus hated as he would have happily blown up the planet from orbit and moved on. However, with Angron committed and refusing to back down, the rest of the traitors had to join as well. What ensued was months of bloodshed as the loyalists held on desperately, killing thousands of traitors. It was a big setback for Horus as it gave time for the loyalists to be informed of the heresy and prepare their counterattack. Likewise, another failure was Fulgrim trying to turn Ferris to the traitor's cause and failing miserably, something that enraged Horus as he was desperate to have Ferris on his side. Now Horus had to adapt his strategy and he did so brilliantly. He knew that due to the way he had positioned the other loyalists, the Imperium would only be able to send the Raven Guard, Salamanders and Iron Hands to Istvaan V, with the only other close enough legions being those already sworn to Horus in secret. We all know what happens next. The Istvaan drop site massacre. In one fell swoop, Horus eliminates Ferris, captures Vulcan and scatters Corvus, while also killing 90% of the 3 loyalist legions. Not bad for something that wasn't a part of the original plan. Horus wanted to try get things back on track. After all, there had been some delays. He did not want a protracted war. He wanted something fast and definitive. Lorgar and Angron were sent to Ultramar to initiate the Ruin Storm, whilst a large force of Wordbearers went to go try kill the Ultramarines on Calth. Sanguinius was gaslit into going to Cygnus Prime by Horus, where huge demonic armies were waiting for him. The Night Lords were sent to go slow down the Lion. They had no chance of beating him, but their hit and run skirmish tactics would be perfect at slowing down the Dark Angels. Fulgrim gaslit Perturabo into following him on a side quest. Magnus and Lehman had smashed each other, with the Wolves faring better than expected due to the Custodes, and the Alpha Legion ran off and started doing their own shit. As for Horus, with his brothers now out of his presence, he begun to get more and more submerged in chaos, becoming this dark, scary, monstrous being. But again, still Horus. He knew not everything would go smoothly, since he also knew that many of his brothers were unreliable, but not everything had to go smoothly. He had tipped the scales far enough in his favor to allow for variables, and he also had a contingency. All that really had to happen was for the Ruin Storm to be created. The Ultramarines being victorious on Calth, the Dark Angels beating the Night Lords, the Blood Angels surviving Cygnus, the White Scars becoming loyalist. These were unfortunate, but acceptable. However, Lorgar and Angron creating the Ruin Storm was essential, and they did succeed. The galaxy was cut in half, with the traitors able to pass between the two halves easily, whilst the loyalists were trapped on the far side, away from Terra, which only had the Imperial fists on it. Now Horus knew that even with the superior numbers, the Emperor would fuck them up anyway, so Horus had to ascend in power. He gathered Mortarion to him, alongside Fulgrim, and invaded Molech, with the intention of claiming the warp power within it for himself. Horus again used master strategy to overcome the loyalist defenses, which were mighty, and entered the warp portal. Horus would spend approximately the next few thousand years in the warp, waging war, leveling up, gaining power, proving himself, until the Chaos Gods deemed him fit and returned him to real space, in which only a second had passed. Horus was deeply changed and was shocked that his sons were still there, as for him it had been millennia. Horus had now been leveled up big time. Basically entering the portal in Molech expanded his vessel so the Chaos could now pour way more power into him. If they had tried to pour the same amount of power into him without him entering Molech, he probably would have exploded. With the power of Molech secure, Horus was ready to attack Terra. However, his retarded brothers were not. Angron had turned into a demon who was rampaging with his legion. Fulgrim was also a demon but had gotten bored of the heresy and instead entered the Webway, allowing his legion to be scattered into warbands. Magnus was still neutral and hiding on a far-off world. The Alpha Legion were doing some random shit. Conrad had also abandoned the heresy after he was freed from captivity, with the Night Lords scattered into warbands as well. It was only Lorgar, Perturabo, and Mortarion who remained steadfast. However, as Horus was preparing to muster, something very unexpected happened. He was first raided by his son Loken and a small band of warriors, then he was full-on ambushed by Lehman and the Space Wolves, who led a suicidal attack on the Vengeful Spirit. Horus welcomed the battle, unexpected as it was, and dueled Lehman. To his amazement, Lehman actually outplayed him and stabbed him with the Emperor's spear. This wounded Horus, giving him a moment of lucidity and actually split his soul. During this lucidity, we see that Horus has been a traitor not because of chaos, but because of himself. However, with chaos clouding his vision, he is a lot less evil about it. The moment then passes and he beats Lehman down, who hesitated after seeing Horus temporarily freed from chaos's influence. Thousands of Space Wolves sacrificed their lives so Lehman could be saved. Now Horus was not doing so hot after this. The spear wound had destabilized him. He had all this power in him that was clashing with the now noble shard of his soul that had had been freed. This caused him to regularly black out and fall into comas, which further complicated things as now there was no present War Master. Despite this, the traitors were still mostly drawn together through the efforts of Perturabo, Malagurst, Lorga, and Mortarion. However, Lorga, seeing Horus being conflicted and wounded, decided to usurp him. Using the bound Fulgrim as well as Nkari and the Emperor's Children Legion as special weapons, he would wipe out the Sons of Horus, kill Horus, and take over. However, Horus was cured of his divided spirit when one of his trusted advisors, Malagurst, entered Horus's coma, killed his noble spirit, and then died alongside it, leaving only the ruthless War Master Horus left. This allowed Horus to awaken from his coma and beat the shit out of Lorga, stopping the mutiny and banishing Lorga from the heresy. However, the spear wound still bothered Horus, and he would occasionally pass out. Horus was now ready to move on Terra. Things hadn't gone super well while he was in and out of his coma. The Alpha Legion had attacked Pluto, Alpharius was killed, and the Alpha Legion withdrew from the heresy after giving Horus an out-of-date map of the Soul's defenses. So Horus had his legion, the Emperor's Children, the Iron Warriors, the Death Guard, and the World Eaters at more or less full strength, with a fraction force of Wordbearers and Night Lords without their Primarchs. However, they were more so a token force, and Magnus had his own agenda. Horus was holding things together by a string. However, his brilliance continued to shine as he was able to overcome the Loyalist forces on Beta Garmin, the last system before Terra. However, he lost the bulk of his Titans during it, which was actually the point of the battle. Horus executed his plan to siege the Sol system, and again, it was a brilliant mix of conventional Legion warfare, spearheaded by the Iron Warriors, as well as the Warp, spearheaded by the Thousand Suns and his own sorcerers. However, Horus also did something strange. He basically lobotomized himself and gave himself dementia. See, he had grown insanely powerful, but he needed to mask that power from the Emperor, so he scattered his mind, spirit, and power, which left behind a somewhat confused War Master, who knew that he needed to take Terra, but was not aware of when he was doing it, why he was doing it, and he even kept mistaking people for other people, even hallucinating. His mind was basically mixing the Great Crusade and heresy together. Sometimes he'd be lucid when he needed to be, but the idea is that he needed to appear weaker than he was, so that he could eventually bait the Emperor into facing him. Thus, he basically gave control of the siege to Perturabo and sat on his throne. Thus, Horus had barely any input on the siege of Terra. Only when Terra was submerged in the warp enough did Horus replace Perturabo with Mortarion, representing a shift from conventional Legion warfare to now being demonic warp warfare, a move that made Perturabo quit the siege in disgust. As the siege reached its conclusion, Horus drew his power and mind back to himself and lowered the shields on the vengeful spirit. The Emperor, desperate and unable to detect the power of Horus due to the warp interference, teleported on board Horus's ship and immediately knew that he had fucked up, sensing how ungodly strong Horus was. Also, as a side note, Guilliman was stuck outside of the Sol system with a massive armada due to the warp interference, so Horus started making the vengeful spirit appear on Guilliman's senses just to fuck with him. Now, Horus was a bit delusional. He believed his cause to be obvious, logical, and righteous. He also saw himself as an unbeatable god. He believed that Sanguinius, the Emperor, and Valdor would come join him and become his new Mournival. He also believed Guilliman would surrender when he arrived, and he believed that he would only have to execute a few of the Loyalists, such as Corvus, who were too stubborn to bend the knee. Horus wanted to rule with his father. Damn, talk about daddy issues. When Sanguinius arrived to face Horus, Horus depowered himself to his normal Primarch form to try convince Sanguinius to join him. However, Sanguinius proceeded to kick Horus's ass and taunt him, which enraged Horus, causing him to summon his full power, and he brutally murdered his brother. Then the Emperor arrived. Horus again tried to get the Emperor to join him, but got enraged when he realized the Emperor wasn't speaking to him or even looking at him, instead looking and speaking to the Chaos Gods, fragile ego and all that. During the entire fight, Horus's daddy issues flared time and time again, allowing the Emperor numerous opportunities to fuck up Horus pretty badly. However, Horus's godlike regeneration meant no matter how many awesome hits the Emperor got in, Horus would always heal. Now, the Emperor would play his final card, creating an illusion of himself being dead, as well as an illusion of Loken, who would tell Horus that now the Emperor was dead, Horus could shed the power of chaos and prove that it was he, not the ruinous powers, that was the master of mankind. Thus, Horus did so. As soon as he did, the Emperor revealed himself and attacked again. Now, chaos didn't give Horus his power back straight away. It wanted to punish him for rejecting them, so it was happy to let the Emperor spank Horus around, knowing that despite being depowered, Horus was still invulnerable. However, with the chaos temporarily lifted and Horus looking his father in the eyes as they fought, it finally hit him. Chaos was this evil thing of hate and destruction. He had betrayed, lied, killed, tortured, all for his own ego, all for chaos. He was a slave to darkness, a puppet to bring pain. There was no new Imperium, there was only lies. lies he had helped spread. In that moment, Horus understood what he had done and what he had become. Horus decided that he wanted to die, and he stopped resisting. But as soon as Chaos saw that the Emperor held the Athame, the only thing that could kill Horus, it panicked and tried to flood Horus with power again. Horus was confused. A tiny knife wouldn't do the trick, but he also noticed the panic in Chaos as it tried to flood him with power. Power he tried to resist. The Emperor hesitates for just a moment and then says, "I wait for you, and I forgive you," as the knife plunges into Horus's heart, and then there is nothing as Horus dies, with nothing but regret in his heart. So that is Horus's perspective of the heresy. There is a reason why Chaos chose Horus, and there is a reason why GW hasn't done alternative heresies in Visions or whatever. It's because Horus inherently wanted to betray the Emperor. He wanted to be King Dick, and he wanted to be the Master. He lied to himself so much that he believed his own justifications and lies, only realizing how wrong he was in the last second of his life. If you enjoyed the video and you want to support the channel, then subscribe. So fucking close to 700k, guys and gal. Let's get it. Remember, I'm also giving away a pre-painted biggie for someone who follows my Instagram and comments on the latest post. Double points for tagging a mate. Join the Discord for more memes. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.